Good afternoon, all. It is super nice to be back after, I don't know, what feels like 94 years, but in fact was just about a week of feeling absolutely awful with my own body deciding to attack itself. It's good to be back in the driving seat, able to speak to you all about stuff. So I haven't advertised this one. I'm fully aware that I have literally just dropped it upon you all from nowhere, so I don't expect many of you to come along live. That's not the point. The point is just I'm alive. I can answer questions. Let's go. So, like always, for these funky little Ask Me Anythings, I'm just going to go wherever you decide to go with me. If we do have any super chats come in, I will bring them up first just to make sure that they are addressed. Because, hey, if you're going to spend money, we're always going to say thanks. But beyond that, I'm just going to jump in with the first sets of comments coming in, which are generally always along the line of this one from Dark Star Nova. Glad you are feeling better. I can't tell you how happy I am on this side. I had a very bad time. Let's just say it wasn't great. Today has been really good, actually, because I've been writing away, tapping away, developing an adventure that Andy Leask is currently writing over for Rookery Bits. So I've been working away on those bits, and it has been the best afternoon. And later on this afternoon, Lindsay's going to be streaming with somebody who's just released their first book for Rookery Publications. Well, not for Rookery Publications. He's going to be talking with them on Rookery Publications YouTube. And he's just 13. And we're doing an interview with him at 7 p.m. UK today. So if you want to see someone who's just released a book at the age of 13, how awesome, you can go do that this evening at 7 o'clock. So that's about an hour from now. Anyway, to answer all those ones, yes, I am alive. And thank you very much, Raptor Faye, for saying so. I am exceedingly pleased to be here. So I would rather not just sit here loosely discussing my health, because for those of you who know me, ever since I had COVID, my health has been like a roller coaster. Let's just assume that this is almost certain to happen again. I'm just going to dive into whatever questions come in and let's see where they go. What type of dogs do you imagine the Empire has? So Gunnar, this is a super fascinating one that you should actually bring up, because I have already responded to this one. I discussed dogs of the Warhammer world some time ago over on one of my blogs. And this is my old blog over at LAWhammer. So while I'm here, I'm going to actually bring that up. And I am going to see if I can go find that over on my blog, and I'll give you a link. So rather than me sit here and wax lyrical about all the different sorts of dogs that you could get inside LAWhammer, I'll instead have Andy of yesterday wax lyrical at you and give you somewhere in the region of around about 30 or 40 different dog breeds. So I'm going to drop that into the comments now, so you can get that there. Here is a link directly for you if you wish to go and have a look. That was something that I wrote all the way back in 2020, not long after I'd resigned from the producer job at Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And I was looking to expand my own game. So I just quickly went, well, you know, there's no real rules for dogs. So I'm going to do a quick dive into not just how to build them, but also building a bunch of different breeds, so you've all got them out there. So that's that one. Right, let's carry on and have a quick look at the next set of comments. Hello, Andy. Glad to see you there. Ditto. Really glad to be here. For a question, your favorite obscure Hochland fact. So, Hochland is one of those weird ones where there's been lots of little lore snippets dropped in various novels, but often they deeply contradict, or worse, veer towards the bland. And by that, I mean there is a habit amongst many Warhammer writers, and I do mean the majority, like 90% of them, to forget that each of the grand provinces have their own discrete, unique characters. And they tend to just go, well, this is the Empire, and they happen to be in the Hochland bit, and Hochland is no different to, say, Middenland or Ostland, or hike it over the border down to Talabicland and Talabheim. They're all basically the same, right? They just have slightly different names, and they're all largely the same peoples, meaning that the Hochland facts that are the most interesting are often the ones that contradict most with the other facts, because people have just dropped random snippets here and there. I particularly like books that have attempted to look at the Empire as a whole and try and discreetly describe each one of the areas and explain the differences. I think this was really nicely done all the way back in Sigmar's Heirs for 2nd edition. Sigmar's Heirs, I will personally say, I didn't think was a particularly great book, but I think that it did an awful lot for making each part of the Empire feel relatively unique and discreet. And it also drew upon more broadly from the lore than, for example, some other books that attempted to do the same. One of the things I also like is that many of the different novels have just randomly added cities in random different places across Hochland. I remember quite fondly the first time that I read Riders of the Dead by Dan Abnett. And Riders of the Dead has got a part where the Demi-Lancers, and for those of you who know me, you know I have opinions on Demi-Lancers. The Demi-Lancers rode from Talabheim through Hochland, through Ostland, and into Kislev. And those that had moved through Hochland moved through a couple of new towns. And these new towns were in places that existing towns already were. And I was in a bit of a bind when I was attempting to map them. So if I'm going to go for my favorite obscure fact of Hochland, I'm going to say that Hochland in particular, out of all the Grand Provinces, is the one that has been overwritten and overwritten the most by different writers because it's such a small area. Now, in terms of overall area, it's still pretty huge. Hochland is a large place, but in terms of the empire, it's really, really small. And in terms of how many rivers are named, in terms of how much banding districts there are, as in your bottom area, which is mostly trees, moving up towards the hilled area, which are mostly barn, the Vice Hills up there, and then moving up towards another hilled area that's all mostly mountains and trees, and then up into the middle mountains. Those spaces have been repeatedly filled with different locations by different authors, many of which are all claimed to be in the same place. And places like Hergig have just moved. Places like Bergsburg have just moved and sometimes just vanished from the setting. And Hochland in particular is, out of all the Grand Provinces, the one that has been the most rewritten out of any of them. You'd think it'd be Reichland, but you'd be wrong because Reichland is big. So yeah, that was a fun one. Oh, we got super chat in, so let's jump onto that one. Hey, Turtle Beef, could you highlight some of the big things that make the Grey College unique? Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying each of the colleges are particularly unique. And by that, I mean they all have a very different flavor. And what makes each of them unique is not just what they share, and obviously they're all basically Harry Potter schools, but it's how they vastly treat the education of magic in different ways. So Grey College in particular. Now, there are two versions of the college and where it lies. There is the established version, let's call it that, which is in the east end of Altdorf, not too far away from the east walls of the city. They sit in the corner segment, the wedge that lies between the River Talabek and the River Reich before it hits its confluence in the center of the city. Now, if you go with that version, we've got ourselves an East End, really broken down, collapsed pile of buildings that is the Grey College. It's all grey stone and weird towers, and just mixes in with the other East End shanties and rookeries, many of which reach 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different levels in height, with this Grey College squat in the middle. Or alternatively, if you wish, you can go with the most recent Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay book, which ditched the previous 30 years of history for where the Grey College was and cited it over in the University District, right beside the Street of 100 Taverns, well, at least not too far away from it. It put all of the colleges in one place, which means that there's a lot of established history you can no longer use, which relies upon the various buildings being in different locations, very different locations, particularly when you move through some of the Wizard Wars. My preferred version is over in the East End because that's the version I always used. The idea of moving them all together and clumping them together in one place is to me very strange, particularly when you look at something like the Amber College. It was never even the city in the previous version. It was down in the Amber Hills on the outside of the city. So some of the things that make it particularly unique is that the Grey College, unlike many of the colleges, they don't centralize their education. They use the standard master-apprentice route, in that each apprentice has a singular master. Often they don't take more than a single apprentice because Grey Wizardry requires an individual amount of attention that many of the other winds don't require. The Grey Wind also is arguably one of the most dangerous winds to give to someone in terms of its overall effects. It's mind magic. And mind magic can not just affect an individual. If you've got the wrong person doing it, it is arguably the most criminal of all the magics, because making someone remember something differently is just potentially nasty. I'll leave it up to your own imagination as to the horrors that could be committed with that. And that means that the Grey Magisters in particular must be very carefully educated. And part of that process is ensuring that the wizard to be is not strongly tainted by the world. So they're looking for younger apprentices. They're looking for people who have not been already massively shaped, which means that they will have to be deconstructed and rebuilt in a new way. They don't want someone with grudges. They don't want someone who has a whole host of harbored neat things that they must respond to with their magic. They're looking for people who can be molded and shaped into something new. Grey wizardry, in general, often, unlike many of the other colleges, doesn't happen at the college either, in that most of the Grey Wizards wander around and take their apprentices with them so they can experience the world and experience the broader world and its impact upon the other people that are around them, and attempt to teach them that the wisdom that is necessary to best use the grey magic, and also explain to them that because they're not only a witch, they're a grey wizard, they're never truly going to be trusted, meaning that they have to be pretty much above and beyond in terms of their character. They have to be the best of the best. Now, of course, individuals aren't that. Plus, the Grey Wind, by its very nature, creates tricksters. But it also brings out the wisdom in many. Grey Wizards are known for their wisdom. They are known for their extraordinary depth of knowledge. And they're directly tied to the Cult of Verena. Indeed, they share a symbol, which is the Sword of Judgment. The Sword of Judgment that is used by both the Cult of Verena and as the core symbol for the Grey College. At the Grey College itself, there's those who have masters who are dead, or alternatively who are orphans, have been taken in by the college. They're often taught by whatever magisters are still sitting inside the college. But it's fair to say that none of them particularly like staying in one place. The Grey Wind, by its very nature, makes one itinerant. It makes one want to move from place to place to place to place. And that really does not fit well with those who want to stay at the college. So there's a bunch of things about the Grey Wind. Generally, I would suggest looking at any of the books that discuss the colleges of magic, and you'll get a really good idea. A strong recommendation for the second edition book, Realms of Sorcery. It does a pretty good job of matching the current version of 8th edition of Warhammer with the older versions. If you go back to the first edition Realms of Sorcery, it's quite old. The Grey Wizard patriarch there is different. And if you go to the most recent version, the 4th edition, it presents a very different version of the colleges while simultaneously matching very closely to 8th. So you'll get quite a lot of good out of that, but do be aware that some of the details deeply contradict with much of what comes from the other sources. So generally speaking, go check out the second edition Realms of Sorcery. I'm going to move down to Raptor Fell 10, and also be aware that I'll need to keep my speed up in this if I'm going to be able to dive back to super chat. So, is there any way, shape, or form that a skink character can work in a campaign in the Empire like the Enemy Within? Let me take a drink first. Being the person I am, just going to drink straight from the bottle. Yes. The answer is yes. But the answer is also, it's going to be really hard. If you want to do it, sure, you can do it. In a game where you've got players who are willing to just run with it, you've got a GM who's happy to do it, you can create a great adventure where this works. Equally, if you're willing to build an extremely unique story and are also willing to accept it's going to come with hideous bigotries from the folk of the Empire and all manner of problems, you could build a really good story. So the best answer to this one is either A, just do it because it's fun, and that you can do it any way you want then. Whatever happens at your table, happens at your table, and it's cool. Number 2 is build a really good story. Like, for example, a lizardman that had been captured with a run through to Lustria. They thought it wasn't an intelligent creature, hissing and screaming. It got put in cages, moved around until eventually someone could communicate with it. And the person who communicates with it frees it. And then that particular skink is brought with them. Perhaps that skink is perceived by the rest of the world as it's almost horrendous to say, but to ensure that it can go almost anywhere, it could be a familiar, a pet, or something of a more established character, allowing that character to interact fully with the world around it, but also not breaking any of the lore. If you go take a look at some of the weird familiars that some wizards have, many of them are the size of the skink, and many of them are way crazier looking than a lizard. And they can literally talk, right, Spiel? So having ourselves a skink-sized character fulfilling a similar role will be acceptable in many parts of the Empire. However, having something that is thinking creature that is attempting to interact with the Empire, perhaps with a nice floppy hat and a feather, stretches credibility, particularly because the Empire itself is filled with such bigotries. But it doesn't stretch it so far that it can't be done. You just have to be clever in the answers that you come up with to make it work. Or the last option is just don't do it and do something else. But I think that definitely it can be done. You just need a good story. Hey, that guy, you know. Why are toad dragons so disgusting? They just are, man. Look at them. Blah. Bleh. Nurgle's favor or general corruption of the waste. So the general story that lies behind this is not very large. Obviously from the Tamarkan book that was released by Forge World, and in Forge World they created the new old toad dragons, and they made them big, and I mean proper big. They gave them stats that made other dragons out there look really bad. I mean, terrible. If you take a look at, say, Galrauch, who we mentioned in one of the Lorebeards episodes, Stotek and I did a big dive into Galrauch, the Golden Drake, who should be leaps and bounds ahead of any toad dragon, and is not. The stats made for the toad dragon were truly crazy, and the background that was left there was weak enough that you could almost answer this with any answer you prefer. You could say, yeah, sure, it's Nurgle's favor. It's exactly that. Or, it's the corruption of the waste where these hang. But there's also that loose description that they are perhaps coming from elsewhere too. So broadly speaking, I would say it's a mixture of all of those things. And I'm sad to say I can't really give an answer that's more direct, largely because Games Workshop hasn't. The only way to give an answer more direct would be to make one up. Hey, Godzilla 2021. How do you think the average high-end dwarf would react to Theodore Bruckner? Would they have more respect for him because of the size of his beard? Now, I think this is a fascinating question, and it's something that's come up in roleplay directly in games I've played. I'll give you a single example of a piece of advice that was given by one of the advisors to Karl Franz. Karl Franz was about to receive a delegation that was coming from Karak Kern. I say about to. He had heard word that they'd set off. They were due in around about 3 months. And the advisor said to him, quite bluntly, grow a beard. And grow a beard, not just because they will accept you better. They won't. Beard or beardless, it won't really make that much difference. The dwarfs are not necessarily going to respect you more or less because you happen to have a beard, but it will show that you are respecting their customs. And the very moment that you heard that they were coming, you made a decision to try and respect them. And that is something that dwarfs respect. They respect being respected. Theodore Bruckner's beard has absolutely nothing to do with respect. Humans are, by their very nature, badly made. They are umgy. It almost certainly goes all the way back to the very beginning of time when the ancestor gods themselves were around and humans were very quickly elevated for whatever reason during the good old wars against the Chaos Gods, first time round as the good old ones hike it out of there. The dwarves were already established. The humans came later and they were misshapen, and it has been pretty much the case all the way down through time that they have always viewed humanity as weaker, smaller, and less capable. Just because he has a big beard means nothing. It literally means nothing. If that beard was grown for a reason and has been kept for a reason, then it is worth respecting. But if he just happens to have one because he's got a big beard, that is not going to impress the dwarves more than just, wow, you've grown that for a certain amount of time. Well done, my son. But hey, dwarf, you grow beards quicker than we do anyway. It's not exactly that impressive. So broadly speaking, I don't think he would get more respect unless there is a story behind it where he chose to grow his beard to show respect to dwarves for one reason or another. And if that was the case, then absolutely the dwarfs would not just respect it, they would strongly respect it. The Laughing God. Hey, Andy, glad you're feeling better. I can't tell you how glad I am. I'm feeling better as well. I'm not 100% tip-top. As any of you are aware, I was very ill last week. My body decided to just attack itself and nonsense all over the place. My skin exploded. I face swelled up. It was just an absolute horror show. Very, very pleased to be back. It was bad enough that at one point, just as I was leading into getting ill, my face had gone so red I had to wear some actual makeup because my skin was attacking itself for one of the streams. And then I just blew up. It was horrible. Let's just get past that. Hey, Turtle Beef. Is a non-threatening mutation, like Six Toes, actually a threat to spread, affect others through chaos, or is it purely a stigmata of public judgment? Right, so there is a definite issue here with Warhammer. And different writers have taken different ways of answering this. And I will give you one that is so absolute that will be enough to make some go, in the Tome of Salvation for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay second, not Tome of Salvation, pardon me, the Tome of Corruption for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay second edition, a decision was made that the moment you get yourself a mutation, your actual species changes. You are no longer human, or indeed whatever other species you may be. You are now mutant. And because you are mutant, that means any artifacts that, for example, kick off against mutant, which might be a detecting artifact, or if a mutant wields this, they get a magic sword of bashy bing bong, or whatever it might be. But it also means that you are on the slippery slope to either one of two outcomes, and only one of two other than your death. And that is Ascension as Demon Prince or Chaos Spawn. Because over time, you gain more mutations, your soul is lost. And it's grim. Super, super grim. So the second edition version of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay is once you've got a mutation, and whether that's something simple and small like an extra toe or an eye, or whether that's something big, that's it. You've tipped over the edge. You're sliding down into the pit, and the Sarlacc is going to eat you. And trust me, unless you've got a pair of wings to fly out of there, you're down that pit and you're dead. You're gone. You're almost certainly a demon when you die. It's just bad news to chaos with ye. However, you'll find that in most of the other books, they have taken a more nuanced approach. And that is that minor mutations are not just common in the Empire, they're very common. And they don't mean that the people who have them are all lost to chaos. Magic permeates through all things in the Warhammer world, the Empire in particular. But further north you go, it gets much, much worse. Norsca, for example, it's everywhere. So things like an odd-colored eye, or an extra finger, or an extra toe, or something else, all of these are common enough that if it was the case that they were all lost to chaos, well, everyone would be a chaos cultist. It'd be properly daft. And broadly, they don't mean your soul is lost, most importantly, but they do have cultural significance. And by that, I mean there are cults, much like the cult of Sigmar, as we all know, that if they spot that, they'll be like, that's it, you're screwed. The Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay second edition version basically took the cult of Sigmar as having the truth, where most of the rest of the time they say the cult of Sigmar is taking, let's say, a choice. And their choice is, if you're slightly mutated, let's just make sure and kill you. Where the rest of them are like, yeah, no, that's not how you work in a civilized society. So to answer your question specifically, is a non-threatening mutation like Six Toes actually a threat of spread, effect through chaos, so forth? The answer is either yes or no. Yes, if you go with something like the Tome of Corruption, it is, you're screwed, you've got mutation, it's going down, and to a degree, those who get too close to you are potentially going to be open to be contracting something from you too. Or alternatively, on the other side, no, it's just you're in a magically suffused place. It's going to endanger you to those who believe it is going to be a danger to others, but in truth, it's not really. And you're probably in trouble culturally, but not necessarily spiritually. But that cultural pressure may push you towards one of the cults, which means the spiritual danger comes in time regardless. I hope that answers that to a degree. Moving down to Sean. Hey, Sean, nice to see you there. Thank you very much. Did you see Sotek's video about the Gelt campaign rework and being in Cathay? And what do you think of this? I didn't see the video, but I am fully aware of what's occurred. And I think it's actually pretty cool, actually. So, the Empire has always had too much focus. And this has caused a problem for Warhammer Total War 3 because they have the big world campaign, but so many of the core characters that are known from the setting pretty much are in the Empire. And that's rubbish. So taking one of the characters out, putting them elsewhere, in this case, in Cathay, and combining two great alchemist characters, in this case, Gelt and What's-His-Face the Dragon, putting them together and having a campaign work there, and then having a Colleges of Magic mechanic work on top of that, I think that's a really good idea, and I think it's a nice fix for a difficult situation. It's looking at the situation imaginatively, and it's attempting to say, what can we do to try and open the world up a little bit, and also try and speak to the different types of politics that it might have in a way that we don't expect, but does make sense within the setting. But more importantly, ensures that their game can have characters starting in different places, telling different stories, doing different campaigns in different ways, keeping their product exciting and interesting to play with, which I think this does. So broadly speaking, I think it's great. Also, Gelt, screw that guy. Mandatus Callum, what do we know of the Wizards' War in 7991? I found few references besides its start and the Dawi helping and it via Captain Gambia. Yeah. Okay, so the Wizards' War, there's more than one of these as well, Mandatus, to make it even more complicated. The Wizards' War dates back to the first edition of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. And has been referenced pretty much since then and changed a bit here or there. But there's been more than one example of it. There has been Wizard Wars that have been dropped down to Midnight. There's been Wizard Wars that moved over to Talabheim. There's been several of them sitting over in Altdorf as well. And because it alliterates WW Wizards War, they often get the same name. They often go, hey, it's the Wizards War. It's the Wizards War. Meaning that sometimes when writers are doing their research, they accidentally mix them up. Which means that when we get to something like this and attempting to identify one of them, it actually becomes a little bit more difficult than I would prefer. I haven't done the individual research on this one for, I don't know, when was the last time I was doing Wizard War stuff? This is back in 2012, I'm going to guess. Maybe, around about then. So we're talking just about the end of Warhammer time. When Warhammer 3rd edition Fantasy Roleplay had just come out, 8th edition had just come to an end. I was writing some articles in the Wizard Wars and similar. And one of the best bits about the Wizards War as a setting is that it really nicely builds up to and works into the Mordheim setting. And Mordheim didn't really use it to any great degree, although it was mentioned in a couple of places. So it really, really nicely works in towards that. We also have the important date of 1979, when Empress Margrethe over in Marienburg is installed and brings the empire to its knees and breaks it completely with the Wizards' Wars and coming out from that as well. Broadly speaking, the answer is we know precious little. But we also know that this period of time is one of extreme warfare, where we have ourselves the breakdown of the entire empire. We have ourselves the rise of new kingdoms, new duchies. We have ourselves old kingdoms being wiped out, Mordheim, new ones being installed. And not long after that, in this great chaos that has erupted across all of the empire, two things are coming around just in the wake of the destruction of Mordheim, and that is the Vampire Wars and a new Everchosen, where a new Everchosen is pretty much brought about by the events of Mordheim. So what do we know? Not enough. What could we know? Whatever we install to it. This is very much an area where you can play with almost impunity and not worry about contradicting anything, because it's mostly an addendum in timelines and little more. So if you really want to get more on that one, I would suggest making it. Hey, Watchdog, if you can make a new Dogs of War faction, how would that manifest? So I really like the Dogs of War faction, barring one thing, and that's that it ignored Tilia. Now, obviously, they were a Tilian-facing book, but we never got ourselves a Tilian army. So if I was going to do a new Dogs of War army, I would do a Tilian army with lots of mercenary contingents added. So I would have a core of Tilians that could be the army with lots of Dogs of War added. So broadly speaking, if I was just starting it from scratch, my start from scratch would be, how would I build a really fun, new, exciting Warhammer version of Tilia? And then what would I do to show that the Tilian army, every single unit of which in it can be used as mercenaries by any other faction, is also building up all the cool Dogs of War, regiments of renown, so to speak, around it. So I would build the ultimate allied army. So an army that can be added to anybody's army, because the Tilians will mercenary their way out to almost anyone, not quite anyone, but almost anyone. And then all the cool regiments of renown that attach onto that from that point. So loosely speaking, I would start with Tilia and then work outwards, incorporating everything that the Dogs of War already had, and then ensuring that lots of cool new extras were added that were respected how the Warhammer world has expanded since then. Oh, I was just about to go back to normal questions, but GoTrek came in. Hey, GoTrek. Good to see you there. Why do you dislike Gelt so much? I don't care much for that. Well, no, neither do I. But you seem to have a few grudges in the book for us now. So, Gelt. I have lots of issues with Gelt. I won't be saying the primary for them. It's all minor stuff. There's nothing really big. But Gelt, for me, epitomizes something that I dislike. We made a promise that I wouldn't cover it all the way back when LAWhammer had 2,000 viewers, and we did ourselves a quick, hey, if we ever hit 5,000 viewers, Sotek will do a big video about Queek, which I believe is pretty much almost finished. And then when LAWhammer hits 10,000 viewers, we'll do the Gelt video. So when LAWhammer has 10,000 subscriptions, we, as in Sotek and I, will be sitting down and doing a big stream about Gelt, during which I will explain my reasons for disliking him, most of which will sound super petty, but nevertheless, they are, for me, very real. So screw that guy. I have many reasons I dislike him, though, Goshek, and we will be covering those at length when LAWhammer reaches its 10,000 subscriber. And somewhat nicely on that, we just reached our 6,000th subscriber. And this is a really nice time to say, if you are watching just now and you haven't liked and subscribed over on YouTube, do please do so, because that's where, when it hits 10K, we'll be doing the Gelt thing, I suppose. So, yeah, that's Gelt. Moving back to the standard comments, let's run down there here. Thank you very much for the super chat so far. It's been super nice. Is there any reason that Nuln seems to have traditionally Jewish names and surnames? Leibowitz, Hezekiah, a couple more. No, there's not. Leibowitz is just an older name from Warhammer. From the very first edition, it was first put inside the Enemy Within campaign. The very first books for the Enemy Within campaign was the first place where the Leibowitz are named, and they were then moved on from there. Hezekiah and possibly a couple of others have dropped as well. But if you look at Nuln as a whole, it's massively in the minority. There is not that many characters that are particularly Jewish in Slant, Daniel. There might be a couple that could be seen as Jewish, but you'll often find that this will be nothing more than ignorant people who come from the UK, normally the UK, who just see the names as not British and sounding like they are German-esque and just using them, not realizing that they may have some cultural significance elsewhere. This is one of the reasons why I have often gone up on a high horse about ensuring that you get yourself cultural sensitivity readers whenever you're creating something that is outside your own natural sphere of knowledge, because you will be accidentally treading on people's toes without realizing that you're doing so. And this is just one of those examples. People who are absolutely blind to what they're doing it anyway. Moving down there, if you could make a new Dogs of War, I've already done that one. So thanks, Watchdog. What's your favorite fleet in the world of Warhammer? So I have, hey Adrian, really nice question. I am a great fan of the old Man of War game. Now, you might not know the Man of War game if you've come to Warhammer much later, but I've been playing Warhammer for so long that most of my beard has gone grey. And Man of War was a game that was released in the very early 90s, petered out through the course of the mid-90s, and it was arguably a classic, one of the best Warhammer games that was ever made. It was surprisingly well balanced, surprisingly well put together, had some really good artwork that was put in place by not just John Blanche, but by Mark Gibbons as well. Mark Gibbons, who you know I love dearly. He's my business partner over at Rookery Publications. And indeed, the artist behind Dark Deeds. I can't believe I've managed to somehow get Dark Deeds mentioned. I'll get onto Dark Deeds in a moment. But Mark Gibbons did quite a lot of the art for things like the Triton, things that we've discussed over in Lorebeards, things like the Behemoths and the great Megalodons, the big nasty sea creatures that are out there. I have played with every single fleet that was in that game, and Man of War keeps on getting referenced even in modern Warhammer for the iconic ships that it created. I played every fleet. I enjoyed every fleet. My favorite fleet to use is completely different to my favorite fleet to play with, which is again very different to my favorite fleet just for how cool it is. So my favorite fleet to use by far was the Nurgle fleet. And its big plague chuckers and the big, huge, rotten ships, because my fleet that I built for it was all covered in gloss varnish and a dripping gook off, and it just looked awful. And it was super, super cool to see on the table. And that's why it was my favorite fleet to actually use. But to actually play in terms of its rules, by far my favorite fleet was the Dark Elves. The great, huge ships that they had, because obviously you've got the Black Arks of Nagaroth and all the Lizardine ships that came out of it and swum out with these skiffs being pulled behind it, were just the freaking best. A really nice feat that was super cartful and unlike all the rest of them. So that was my my favorite feat to actually play with, just because it had so much cart and worked differently. But in terms of the one that was the coolest to actually see in terms of the background, or the one that I've enjoyed working on writing, almost certainly the High Elves. And that's because they rule the waves and have done for almost centuries. You can argue, yeah, the Dark Elves have been doing their thing, but the High Elves pretty much shut off the oceans until Finubar came along. And that really does, in terms of writing stories, mean that they come up again and again and again, because they held back technology, they held back trade, they held back pretty much the old world from the new world. They ensured that the lizardmen didn't make contact with other species anywhere near as much as they may have done. They pretty much dominated world politics, and because of that, it makes their fleet an extraordinary part of Warhammer's history. No other fleet has got the same enormous impact that the High Elf one does. Moving back, we've got a couple of super chats, so I'll dive over onto those. FE41, given how comically oppressed the Bretonnian peasants are, yes, they are comically oppressed, has there ever been a major peasant uprising in the setting? Yeah, there's quite a few examples of peasant uprisings. This has been the case all the way back from when Bretonnia was first changed by Nigel Stillman, when he wrote the Bretonnians back in, gonna guess, that's 5th edition Warhammer, for the first Bretonnian army list that was made for 5th edition Warhammer. And that's when the Bretonnians moved from being what they were back in Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay First Edition, where the Bretonnians were basically the French equivalent of the Empire, and they were just a almost post, but pre-revolutionary France, really. Musketeers and big wigs, and thingy Tet Dor, who sat on the big-headed king that sat on the throne, and the 5th edition came and completely rewrote Bretonnia and turned it into the equivalent of an English version of Knights of the Round Table. We're Knights of the Round Table. Very Monty Python-esque in terms of certain aspects of how it was presented, but really grim and really over the top in terms of both how absolutely perfect those knights were and how absolutely oppressed the peasants were. But even back then, they had quite a lot of revolutionary movements, and they even had some special characters that reflected the peasantry. You're talking Bertrand Le Breton, for example, and all of the oppression that Bretonnia represented always had a counterpoint. But you often find that because Warhammer, and 40k is particularly criminal for this, Warhammer often has this need to try and make everybody a hero. It meant that our big oppressors, the kings and the dukes, who really, in many respects, are bad guys, particularly to the peasants, when they were presenting them as what they were for the setting, they were like, no, these are the heroes of the Warhammer army, so these are actually good guys. So the peasants who are being oppressed love them, you know? And the oppression, they oppress in a nice way, you know? And that often got confusing, particularly given that you had the reality that the background presented balanced off with what the Black Library stories might suggest, which vacillated wildly from the peasants are brutally oppressed to, oh no, the nobles are super heroic, to something that lay in between. Each writer really had their own spin on it. It made it difficult to pop down, but if you look between the lines, yes, major uprisings, they have occurred, and they have always failed. You got to remember, though, that it is worth also noting that the lady very much tries to keep Bretonnia together as a cohesive unit. So if you are following through on the lady's, let's say, teachings of honor and how that you are meant to, as a noble, look after your people, and how the people should be looking after the nobles in turn, and it's a self-sustaining situation where the peasants need the nobles and the nobles need the peasants, and they are working together to protect each other in their own ways. If it's working correctly, the peasants should be comfortable. And the nobles should be comfortable. The peasants should be in a position where they need for nothing, and nobles equally should need for nothing. The nobles are sacrificing their lives day on, day out on the field to protect the peasants. The peasants are giving their lives in the fields to ensure that those who are protecting them are fed. At least that's the ideal model. But in reality, as we know, people are the worst. and it all breaks down. Power corrupts. Hey, Creme Gelto. Good to see you, Creme Gelto. It's been so long ago I became a space. You've been, yeah. So I have been away for a wee while, pardon me, that you've become a space marine. And I see that Kermit Gelt stroke space marine icon. Creme Gelto. Best ever. Hey, laughing God. A friend of mine and I were discussing the consolidation of Undead and Nagash, which felt a shame in the case of Krell. I couldn't agree more. I really wish the world had more intelligent undead and white characters. Laughing God, I agree. I remember way back in the day when the Undead Army list first came out for Warhammer. I'm thinking 4th edition here, given where I was at the time. I was working for Games Workshop. The 4th edition came out, and we had our first discussions of Nagash. We had our first discussions of the Tomb Kings. We had our first mention of Krell as a character moved up and out of the older edition and brought into the new one, and he wasn't brought underneath the wing of Nagash at this point, although there was definite connections. We got our first mentions of, obviously, Nehekara and the great expanse of the Tomb Kingdoms, and our first kings and the good old Tomb King of them all himself. But even then, Cetra was not that special back then. He was just basically a slightly better mummy. And back then, the Undead Army list encompassed everything. It encompassed whites, it encompassed lichs or liches, if you prefer. It encompassed Nagash. It encompassed everything. And that, to me, is what Warhammer Undead was, whether it was ghosts and mummies and all those things all being there. And then they started messing around with that formula and siphoning in on individual armies. So we got vampire counts. We got ourselves the undead from the south, the Tomb Kings. And then slowly but surely, it all got brought underneath the wing of Nagash as they kept on pumping Nagash with furthermore warpstone steroids until he became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and became so all-encompassing that effectively anything that was undead was his. That isn't what it started off as, but that's definitely what it became over time. And anything that wasn't that got sidelined, particularly if it wasn't part of one of the established factions. So any undead that weren't part of the Tomb Kings or the vampire counts were forgotten. So our Barrow Whites and our ancient undead entities that had been living under the Empire, our strange necromancer towers with all of its craziness, old likes elsewhere doing their thing, were largely forgotten and sidelined. They're still part of the background, but they don't really exist. So broadly speaking, I agree with you entirely, but I would also say that they're not gone. They're just not really talked about. And I'm sure at some point they will resurface in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different products, particularly if you look at the role-playing game, which is always looking to include a different undead or indeed different any type of story. Hey, Jakob. Oh, thank you very much. So very appreciated. That was super nice. I shall move on. Other than just saying thanks to you, Jakob, that was lovely. Cool. I'll be turning 21 this morning. 21! I'll just say that LAWhammer as a channel turned 1 yesterday. We're 1 year old. We had our first anniversary just yesterday. We had ourselves our first anniversary session, which by the end of it, everyone was like, oh, so that's what the session was about then. Because we had a very, very big Warhammer character pop up the end of that session. It was super fun. The episode ended up being much longer than we originally intended because the players spent a little bit of time making their way down through the Faustschlag. And they eventually met some people down there. Things happened. Old ones, stuff. It was crazy. But we're going to actually, when we pop them up online, they're going up online right now. We're splitting it into 2 episodes because it just took too long. But yes, 1 here over on our side for LAWhammer as well. So happy birthday to you, and also happy birthday to us. Unrelated question: how much would I have to drink in a week to drink as much as the dwarf does daily? Okay, if this is as variable as the dwarves themselves. Now, if you go by the standard lore, dwarves effectively, much like I might be drinking me brown fizzy water over here, or you might be drinking your water or your beer or whatever it is you at home. Beer is their standard choice of liquid that they consume, meaning that your average dwarf, which is probably consuming somewhere in the region of around about 3 liters of the stuff every single day, you're looking at about 1.5 bottles of these at least every single day to get an idea of how much that's going down for. So that'd be around about 6. So at least 6 to 7 pints daily, I would say, for standard consumption. And then you've got when they go out to the pub of an evening, and then you add all the additional pub drinks on top. So broadly speaking, an awful lot, Cole. Really, an awful lot. Hey, Wind Turning Leaf. I was wondering, which is more up to date for LAWhammer, the live sheets or the talents document? Notice that there are talents referencing interrogate, yes, chirurgery skills not on the sheets. Interrogate is on some of the sheets. The talents document is the most up to date. Chirurgery skill over on LAWhammer is equivalent of surgery. It's an advanced skill, so it doesn't need to be on the sheet. So I just never bothered putting it on. But I probably will do that when I do my next pass over them. In fact, the fact you brought it up, One Turning Leaf, is enough for me to go. I'll go and mess around on the sheets right after this. A couple of the sheets do have interrogate. For those of you wondering what the heck this is going on about, I have an actual play that runs. That's what my last answer and last question is about. An actual play of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay that I stream live online pretty much almost every week, except for 8 weeks where we're either there's too much of us ill, or alternatively, it's our actual holiday week off. We've just had our first anniversary, which is what I was just talking about. And all of the stats for the characters are available online if you want to go and have a look at them. And we have changed the rules completely from the official game. Now, the official game, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, that's the current one, although I'm sure there'll be another one very soon. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4, I wrote. Me and a team of absolutely marvelous folks put that one together. But for the needs for live roleplay, I completely changed the rules. So the ones that are online, the ones that we use are different. And we've got a different set of talents that are up online for our talent document for that. And the talents, I believe, are almost up to date. I'll check that afterwards. But the live sheets are a little bit behind. Interrogate is a skill. Chirurgery is also a skill. That's effectively your ability to cut folks up. So, for example, in our game, Gerhardt is not a surgeon. He's a doctor. He knows how to look after folks. He doesn't know how to cut them up. Okay, just looking at the time, because I'm aware that the Rookery will be streaming at 7, and I have to pass over to them, but we're not there yet. We're 18 minutes to. Hey, Roderick. Hey, Andy. Just want to pop in a wave. Hi, Roderick. I can't express how nice it is to see you. I have been very ill, so at the very least, it's just good to just wave. Hi, Roderick. Good to see you. Really nice. Right, jumping back onto my comments. I'm going to drop over here. I'm going to say, Hawk, you rock. Pre-order Dark Deeds here. It's a good opportunity to just bring that up. Hawk is, of course, the best person in the world because he's brought up Dark Deeds. Dark Deeds is a game that has been put together by us over at the Rookery. If you don't know about it, you should go check Rookery Publications webpage and you'll find all manner of cool things about the dark deeds that you can commit. It is a game, there you go, a card game there, of malicious minions. In fact, you can read a little bit of text there. Now, this is running from memory because I literally can't see it because I put this in front of the character. The camera, pardon me. It'll say something like it's darkly humorous card games of skullduggery and suspicion for 2 to 5 players or something like that. We are all playing malicious minions in the service of a powerful, mysterious, and is it clearly villainous patron? You can probably read it better than I. Anyway, so you are all working against each other to try and impress the patron. Whoever gets the most impress the patron points at the end. That's not the name of the points. Wins the game. If it's a big draw, then you all lose. That's what happens. Ha ha ha. It's a super fun hour with gorgeous art put together by Mark Gibbons, who we've already mentioned. If you've ever seen any of the original art from Nagash or the Green Knight, or indeed most of the big Warhammer characters, they were all done by Mark Gibbons. And Mark Gibbons is our artist who did all this. Indeed, you'll notice Mark Gibbons' name is right in the bloody front, alongside Andy Chambers, who you might know for writing things like the original Skaven Army List. Andy, obviously, superb chap. So they put that together. I helped put the rules together for this game as well. It has been a joy to work on. Do please go take a look at it if you haven't done already. And you'd like to say happy birthday to LAWhammer for its first year being successfully done. There is no better way to say happy birthday than to buy Dark Deeds. Hey! How close did I get with the wording? Pretty close. Pretty close. Alrighty, so I'm aware that time is going to be tight, so I'm just going to quickly check. I'll go right. Hey, Andy, talk about Ostland. Oh, okay, I love Ostland. I really love Ostland. So I'll be relatively brief on this one, Jakob. Ostland is one of the most misunderstood parts of the Empire. Because it has been written about in 2 ways. And I discussed this earlier in the stream. Many writers forget that the Empire is huge and the Empire has significant cultural differences in different parts. It is not one big homogenous kingdom. It would be a little bit like saying, hey, in the UK, Scotland is identical to England. It isn't. It just isn't. We have completely different politics at the very least. We have completely different histories. We also have completely different views as to exactly how the country should be both run or viewed. We are very different people, but similarly, we have cultural connections. They're not only deep, they're abiding, and many people in Scotland consider themselves British, not Scottish, much like many people in England consider themselves British and not English. There's many people who think that we're all part of one big nation with different cultural roots. The empire's somewhat similar, but more broadly spread. Ostland is bigger than the UK, much bigger than the UK, and it's got lots of cultural factions within it. Having said that, let's discuss the place as a whole. In general, it's in the big northeast of the empire, bordering Kislev, and that makes a significant difference towards its culture as well. It's right on the edge of the Kislev Verge, which is the big expanse where the forest connects to the big open oblasts of Kislev. Now, depending on which version of Kislev you've got a mixture of taiga, open steppes, snow that extends forever, plains, or trees. In other parts, it's slightly different. Different versions of Warhammer present it in different ways. But broadly speaking, the peoples are always the same, the Ungals and the Gospodars that are over there. And then we've got ourselves the good old Ostlanders that sit here. They are, as a people, generally shorter than most of the Empire's people. They've got their own cultural identity that is laced through into their iconography everywhere. In the big red bull symbol you often see, that big red bull is called Guvar. Guvar, Guvar, a god, Guvar the bull god. And Guvar the bull god is a particularly stubborn, obstinate creature, and that goes through to the character of the Ostlanders as a whole, who are known for being particularly stubborn and particularly obstinate folks. They are, in terms of the empire, much more, now I hesitate to use the word, but Eastern. And by that, I mean they're much more strongly influenced by Prussian and Polish and Eastern real world cultures. And if you take a look at, say, Valmor von Raukov, he was meant to be almost an epitome of what many are. And Valmor von Raukov was effectively almost a Mongol in terms of how he was presented, way east, going far further than you might expect. The names for the naming conventions, for Ostland vacillate wildly between sounding 100% German, 100% English, and 100% Polish, depending upon who was writing it. There's some of the place names over there that are so Polish that I can't pronounce them because I'm English in terms of speaking. See, there you go, the whole, I'm Scottish, English differences there. Where others are so very English that I'm almost like, why are they even being used in a place that's supposedly Eastern Empire? As a place that is generally much poorer than other parts of the empire, and even though it is a big coastal nation to the north, its coast has been massively put down over the course of time by both raiders from the north, from Norse, Kislev's interest in ensuring that the north of the empire does not have any, let's say, great fleets working against them, but most importantly, Marienburg, who have deeply held the northern coast in place. Now, the real reason for why there's no great northern fleet for Ostland is completely different. The real reason is Rick Priestley didn't want to have any big names for big cities up in the north, imbalancing the map that he wanted to have all the detail down in the middle. I actually remember discussing with him about that at Games Day, and he was like, yeah, nah, we just wanted like Altdorf, Nuln, at the very north at most, Middenheim, and we did not want anything on the northern coast. So we just didn't worry about it. And then later writers made up excuses for why none of the northern coast was particularly well developed. This was changed over time, though. I wrote a piece, for example, inside Shades of Empire, where the various navies of the empire were discussed. And the building navy for Nordland, particularly post various incursions from the north, and the navies for Ostland were discussed in that. So they do have a navy. Beyond that, they're one of my favorite places, actually. Guvar, black and white colors. I just really like Ostland, but I won't spend too much time because obviously there's others who have dropped in and said stuff. So I hope that was enough to at least start us off with, Jakob. Hey, Hendrik, what would happen in practice if Gotrek died outside of combat, seeing his staggering accomplishments? I guess Grombrindal would prevent his fate anyhow. So it wouldn't be down to Grombrindal. It would be down to a completely different... I'm going to stop, Hendrik. He'd just die. Now, you could argue that he wouldn't. And if you want to go for the argument that he wouldn't, because effectively he's following in Grimnir's footsteps and he is ultimately fated to end where Grimnir ends. That means that he just won't die. He just won't. Him dying outside of combat won't happen. But if you're not going with that story, then he just dies lots of extremely impressive dwarfs have existed over the course of time. And Gotrek is, in the greater scheme of dwarfdom, not really that special. I mean, he is, because we've got novels, and the novels have told us stuff, but even then, the novels are written from an in-character perspective and possibly not true. So, broadly speaking, you've got two choices. Choice number one, he just dies. Choice number two, fate steps in, the next author, and comes up with another reason for why he will be Grimner come the end. So yeah, his deeds and his staggering accomplishments don't really make any great difference. What matters really is the cosmology of the world according to how you perceive it. And if you believe that he is effectively going to be Grimner one reason or another, he is going to survive, because that's just how it works. Or alternatively, you can say, yeah, no, he's just a dwarf. And if he's just a dwarf, no matter how staggering his accomplishments, this is Warhammer. People die, and that's okay. Right, moving back to our normal questions. Could the Empire, any of the Grand Provinces, retake Sylvania, or is it already considered as lost? Absolutely. It's not. The exact opposite is the case. Even come 2022, which was when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 2nd edition was taking place, Sylvania wasn't considered lost. It was considered part of the Empire, and it was still paying taxes. Sylvania was in no way lost. It hadn't properly risen up with vampires all over the place. That happens pretty much just after that period. And that's like 2022 to the end of the world in just like 5 years or so. So that's an exceedingly short space of time. And in that space of time, anything could occur. If the Empire spent all of its, let's say, time focusing on trying to take out Sylvania, it would. It just would. I mean, the vampire counts are impressive, yes, but you got to remember that during the Vampire Wars, the Empire was fractured. It was not working as one thing. And even though it doesn't really work as one thing come 2022, 2023 or whatever, Karl Franz has reached the point where he's bound it together more than enough that the Empire can be wielded as one unit effectively. That being the case, yes, he would win. But the end of the world gets in the way. That's the real reason that it doesn't really quite happen. Mr. Law, I read that Gelt succeeded Gorman as Supreme Patriarch by duel, correct? Are we talking magical combat here? Yes, we are. A more friendly academic competition? No, we're not. In Magic, because I can't see Gorman losing to... So, yeah, so there is a big one there that I'm not going to go into in any detail, but let's just say that Gelt did not win under normal circumstances. Why is it so the first city when nothing about its profile seems to particularly worthy or warranted? Yep, completely agreed. I'll leave that one actually to, because we have been considering doing a pretty big stream over on the Lizardmen side, because we're reaching the point where doing one of those is well worth it again. We sort of touched upon them a little bit, Sotek and I, when we were discussing our way through the old world and all the changes that it made to the lore. And I think we're reaching the point where moving back to Lizardmen is a good idea. This Sunday, we're going to be discussing Altdorf, which is going to be super fun. We're doing that over on Lore Masters Sotek's channels. So that's over on Lore Masters Sotek's channels at 4 p.m. UK tomorrow. Make sure you're there. We're discussing Altdorf, the capital, and boy, do I have opinions about this one. I mean, I do mean strong opinions. So similarly, we're probably going to be tackling ones like Itza. So I'll leave that one to those, because I think we'll get a little bit more in depth, because these Q&A ones tend to be relatively short, fast, snapshotty ones. I think that deserves a bit of time. Hey, Sweden, we discussed this duel extensively recently. Yes, we did. You weren't speaking to me there, so I shall move off quickly. LAWhammering, are Lizardmen immune to chaos corruption? No, they're not. What are the way possible to get affected by each chaos god? Right, so Lizardmen aren't, Slann are. I had this discussion at length with Gav Thorpe. We were building Pass of the Old Ones, a campaign. That was going to be following on from the Enemy Within campaign for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition. And we built up a really big story. And that story was how, at its heart, it's how do you corrupt a Slann? Can it be done? And the answer is no, until you realize the answer is yes. And we had a really big discussion as to exactly what it would mean, how it could happen, how it could be done. Lizardmen can be corrupted. They are mortal, quite corruptible souls, but they have, it's against them in pretty much all considerations for it to occur. But that doesn't mean it doesn't occur. Where Slann, it is effectively impossible until, and it was the until and the how does that made the difference. Particularly given that you've got to remember that as far as Warhammer is concerned, the Lizardmen lose. Everybody loses. The world comes to an end. And that comes hand in hand with a host of really difficult questions that need to be posed and answered. And Past of the Old Ones was the first step towards that. So loosely speaking, they are not by any stretch immune to chaos corruption. They are, however, culturally very much against chaos corruption, meaning that the chaos gods have it far tougher in terms of actually corrupting them. Got to remember they're cold-blooded, so the whole emotion thing, they don't have the same necessary extremes of emotion as a species that you might consider for many of the others. But when you've got your red-crested species and good old Tehenowen coming along and firing them up like something crazy, that starts changing things. And as we discussed in our stream about Tehenowen, the entirety of the Lizardmen were changed to a degree through the processes of Tehenowen and the rise of Sotek. So go check out that stream if you want to know more about that, because we do discuss it at length. Hey, Charles CK there. Are there populations of fully families, clans, whatever, of Imperial ogres or elves where there are dwarves or halflings? Are these species mostly just individuals? Have they moved there for reasons? So yes. So are there full families, clans, whatever, of ogres? Ogres, yes, and they're found almost entirely in the Moot. There have been ogres who have dwelled in the Moot almost since the Moot first began over 1,500 years ago. Halflings and ogres share a connection, and halflings have lived hand in hand with ogres for most of their existence. And halflings have pretty much... Whoa, I can hear music arriving from somewhere. Let me just go figure out what happened there. I think that means my wife has just gone live. So that means I have a couple of minutes left before I have to wind down. I'm going to be going over to Inside the Rookery because they have got extremely interesting stream. I'm just going to quickly discuss that one before I move on. I'll get into this one later, Charles CK. Loosely speaking, yes. And my wife, I've just posted up the post there. So that's Lindsay, has just started a stream over on Rookery Publications. I just made it there. Rookery just went live. In fact, Rookery just went live, as Hawk said. Missed that one there, Hawk. Now, the stream that they're doing is with a 13-year-old boy who has just written his first book on, not on world building, but a full world that he has actually built and published over on Amazon. And the Rookery is all about world building and designing your own worlds, which for those of us who do role-playing the Warhammer world is super fascinating. I cannot recommend this one enough because he's only 13 and he's been writing this book for the last 3 years and has actually published it. I've seen it. We own it over at Lindsay's got it over in the other room. And he's written entire symphonies for national anthems. He's got into a massive amount of detail. So yeah, well worth checking out. That's in about 2 minutes over there. I'll see if there's anything I can quickly answer just before I stop. How awesome would it be for LAWhammer PCs to be heroes in Total War? Oh, that'd be beyond awesome, Watchdog. That would be amazing. So I'm going to finish off with super thanks for everyone who turned up today. Enormous thanks to anyone who ordered Dark Deeds through the course of the stream. And if you didn't, the links for that are down in YouTube's comments right now. If you're over on Twitch, apologies massively if I missed your suggestions, but if you pop over YouTube, you will find the links down there. Inside the Rookery is starting pretty much now. I have dropped the links over. I will drop it again. If you don't want to follow links, just literally look for Rookery Publications on YouTube, on Twitch, even on like X, and we stream everywhere. We're all over the place. So yeah, we can be found. And I will end with Hawk saying, Andy, you still owe me a drink for pre-ordering. And I'll have a drink at this side. But you're right. I owe you a drink. Next time you're over here, Hawk, it's on me. So beyond that, thanks very much, everyone, for turning up. This was a super fun one. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.